¿A qué alumno, adulto y autodidacta no le encantaría tener un profesor que lo tome en serio, que crea en sus capacidades y en su progreso? Durante mis años de profesora para alumnos de todas las edades, he oído muchos comentarios sobre frustración, sobre profesores que no quieren enseñar a adultos, creencias limitantes de que los adultos no avanzan, de que no pueden llegar a cierto nivel, y todo tipo de ideas que se repiten y que me parece importante ponerlas en duda. Por eso decidí entrevistar a alguien que pudiera explicaros su punto de vista, además del mío. ¿Y a quién decidí entrevistar? Pues cuando decidí ponerme online, después de muchos años tocando el piano sola y dando clases presenciales, me pareció que también era un buen momento para reciclarme, para seguir estudiando con alguien y escuchar otros puntos de vista. Y para eso hice toda una búsqueda en internet buscando un profesor que pudiera tocar cualquier aspecto técnico del piano, cualquier pieza. Fui mirando varios profesores, pero una u otra cosa no me acababa de convencer. Hay gente con mucha técnica, pero que no le da tanta importancia a la interpretación. Hay gente muy musical, pero que no tiene tanta técnica. Y hay todo tipo de profesores diferentes, pero yo buscaba a alguien muy completo. Y un día me apareció un reel de Aaron Petit, me encantó cómo explicaba y la claridad de su pedagogía y fui a su YouTube. Y ahí me di cuenta de que efectivamente estaba ante una persona que podía tocar cualquier cosa del repertorio pianístico. Y cuando hablo de cualquier cosa no hablo de llegar a tocar estudios de Chopin, estudios de Liszt, no. Cualquier cosa es hasta el máximo de lo máximo, que es un nivel al que cuesta de llegar y parece que nos quede inaccesible. Pero a pesar de tener un nivel tan alto, a él no le importa enseñar a alumnos de todas las edades y tiene muchos alumnos adultos. Así que le he hecho una entrevista preguntando varios temas interesantes para ayudaros a todos los adultos autodidactas. Os voy a contar un poquito más sobre Aaron y luego podéis escuchar la entrevista. Aaron estudió en la Universidad de Miami, ha ganado muchas competiciones, entre ellas la Gershwin International y la de Seattle Field Tone Basel Competition, y me encanta que estudió con dos grandes pianistas. Uno de ellos fue Mark Westcott, que ya no vive. En Europa no se le conoce mucho, pero estaba al nivel de los grandes, un pianista excelente, podéis buscar vídeos suyos en YouTube. Y también estudió con Mark Salman, un concertista también muy conocido allí, que había conocido en persona a Horowitz y había trabajado con él. Así que Aaron lleva un legado muy valioso que nos puede traspasar a los demás y tiene muchísima experiencia enseñando. Debe llevar ya unos 150 alumnos y estáis a punto de enteraros de lo que piensa sobre los alumnos adultos, sus posibilidades, sus bloqueos y hasta dónde pueden llegar. La entrevista está en inglés, pero os he puesto los subtítulos a mano para asegurarme de que tengáis una buena traducción. Hi Aaron, happy to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I was looking forward to interview you about many things because I know you have a lot of experience and you have had so many students that I'm sure my followers are going to benefit from all your experience and information.
Yeah, it'll be fun. I'm excited to share and see what we can get into today.
So I have usually a lot of adult students and self-taught students, and I tend to see always the same kind of problems all the time. So it seems like there is a package that they could benefit from when they start, because problems are usually posture problems, technical problems, lack of weight, of proper attack to the keys. It's always the same kind of thing. So I wanted to ask you about that, especially what are the most common technical or position problems you see all the time in self-taught or adult students?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's definitely a big topic because most people do have the same problems, but it's a big list of problems, and it's not everyone that has every issue. So I would say what's probably the most common is actually how people practice, their actual habits, versus the maybe like an exact technical issue they have. Uh, Most people don't know how to be aware of what they need to work on. And so the first problem I would go after, especially in an adult student who is maybe limited on time, is how do you organize your practice, first of all? And let's say you have an hour and you have an overall plan on what to do within that hour. How do you become aware of whether you're achieving your goal or not? So I think one of the most important things to learn is to recognize a problem and then to actually reflect your practice based on what that problem is, and to not just play over and over, but to realize that you have to be specific and make your exercises that you do based on the problem not just something that maybe everybody else does. So for example, a lot of people practice Hanon for hours because that's normal to do, and they say, oh well, Hanon is famous, so do that. But if Hanon isn't really what you're struggling with, if you have pretty good finger technique, you don't really need to practice it, for instance. And so I think it's just important to not put time into things that aren't really your issue, but to only focus on what the real problem is. That's the first thing I would say.
How can people realize what they need to work on? Because what I see the most of the time, today I was talking to my students about the difference of playing or studying. It's very normal that they think that playing is studying, and you also talk about that. So now you are saying the most important thing is to identify your biggest problems and find a solution and focus on that. But I think only that step is already confusing for some people. So what could you tell them to start that process?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and a perfect follow-up, because I experience the same with my students, where they say, okay, I want to be focused, but how do I even know what to work on? I always start at the base level, the fundamentals of piano playing. So there's 12 that I categorize, as you know, but I would always start with the 3 that are universal to every genre of music. So whether you're playing Bach or the Beatles, it doesn't matter. It's notes, fingering, and rhythm. Because no matter what you're playing, there's a certain set of notes you're going to play. There's a certain pattern of fingers you're going to use, and every piece has rhythm in it. You know, many other things are different. From Ravel to Bach to Mozart, you might use different pedaling, or you might shape it differently. Or in a Chopin nocturne, you might have more balance to the melody, like the melody is louder than the accompaniment. Those are often genre-specific things. But when it comes to notes, fingering, and rhythm, like every music in the world has that. And so those are the first 3 things I would think of as the checklist. You know, if you're getting the right notes, if your fingering is consistent, that's the key. Because maybe one time you can do a passage a certain way, and it's fluid and you feel good, but the next time you change the fingering because you're not thinking about it, and all of a sudden it messes up the crossover and you miss the note now. And so the consistency of the fingering is the most important part. And for the rhythm, I simply make sure at first that you can play one hand on its own, counting out loud with the metronome going on. That's like that should, it may not happen right away, but that should be the first goal. Because if you can't even play one hand correctly, you know, like very fluidly with the metronome, you probably haven't internalized the rhythm yet. Once you have them on their hands separate, then you can start to put it together in smaller chunks. But I would start with that. That's sort of the basic package: notes, fingering, rhythm. And it's also probably the hardest to develop in the beginning and even in the early intermediate stages, because those 3 things are fundamental. You can move a little bit wrong and you might get a wrong note. It's really easy to forget a fingering, you know, if it's not in your muscle memory yet. And the rhythm, when we're still trying to process the notes, we often pause when we can't find it, and then we slow down and we build that into the playing, even if it's subconscious. So to become more aware of it, like you asked, the number one thing I would say everybody should do, we're in the 21st century, is record yourself. You know, we need to do this so that we can hear ourselves when we're not focused on doing it. Because as soon as you play, my brain is, half of it at least, is focused on actually moving the keys. When I do this, and so on. Now, I can try to listen to that and try to be aware if I have the notes and the fingering and the rhythm and all of the other things. But I may not realize I did a certain thing a certain way until I actually go back and watch myself. So if you can record yourself every day a little bit, not every practice repetition, but definitely at least once within the session, and go back and watch, you'll discover a lot. And if you just go through it in terms of those three things as like a checklist, did I get the right notes? It's a yes or no question. You either did or didn't get it. And if you didn't, then now you have a goal to work on. You can figure out where you got off and maybe why. You can, if you film from above, you can watch back slowly and see if you got the right fingerings. And you should always write in the fingerings in the sheet music. For example, I'm learning Liszt Piano Sonata, and you'll see on every section I write in fingerings. Even on basic chords where you wouldn't think I would need them. I mean, it's probably, there's only one way of doing that, but I still write it in, just the act of doing it, because it keeps me more involved. And when you associate a physical motion with the learning, you will remember it for a longer time. So record yourself and then go back through with the notes, with the fingering, and with the rhythm. See if you can tap or use a metronome with the recording you're playing back to see how accurate it was. And you should be able to be much more aware of your playing tendencies at that point. So the last piece on that would be, it's also good to do something 5 times in a row and record it all 5 times. Maybe if it's just 2 measures even. Because you might play it totally fine one time, but it doesn't mean it's mastered yet. Because the next time you have a slip that you didn't have the first time. Or maybe also like you get it wrong 3 times and on the 4th time it's fine. So it's really important to get just more feedback. If you can get 5 repetitions and you compare all of them, you'll see which mistakes you make more often and which ones maybe only happened for that one repetition.
Yeah, that's great. I think this is going to help them a lot because it gives them a way to start.
Yeah.
And it's not only a simple way, they have already lots of things to do.
Yeah.
But there are other things I see a lot on adult students, and these are limiting beliefs. And there are 2 that I listen most to. One of them is adult students are always going to learn slowly. And the other one is that they are always going to stay at a very low level.
Well, I've heard both of these for sure. And I've seen both extremes happen. There are a couple of adult students that I've worked with even that years into their study they've made very little progress. And I think it's not so much my teaching or that they weren't talented or something like that. I think it almost always comes back down to how far people push themselves. Certain people have personalities that just don't want to go outside the comfort zone. So I'm thinking of 3 people in particular out of 150 that I've worked with, where it feels like they just didn't learn that much at all. And all 3 of them were not high achievers in their mindset. That's like you said, it's a limiting belief. It's not really a physical skill issue or a brain age issue at all. It's that because they believe they will not progress quickly or that they can't, they let that actually develop their practice. And so when they do get quality information on how to change things, they still just kind of go through the motions and don't really push for the higher level. Because ultimately they don't believe they'll achieve it. So why would you want to fight for something if you didn't believe you'd win? You know. So it actually has to be the other way around. This is where the role of faith comes in. Whether you have faith in like a religion or not, that doesn't matter in this context. But it's the same idea. That you have to believe something before you can see it in order for yourself to want to pursue it and make it real. And so a great example would be, if you, just very general here, if you want to learn a Chopin piece, for instance, let's say the Fantasy Impromptu, and you have a belief about it that it's too fast, I can't play that fast, or I can't learn to play 4 against 3 polyrhythms, then even if you want to do it and you sit down every once in a while to try, your brain is ultimately not paying attention to what it's doing because it says, no, it's not achievable, so I don't actually have a problem to solve. Even though, of course, there is, because it's above your skill. But if you say, I will figure this out, I just don't know how yet, automatically your brain starts thinking a different way. And so you try it, and you actually observe what's going wrong, and you actually do figure out a problem. Now, it still may take a long time, and certainly there's going to be frustration. I don't want to make it sound easy, like in one day you can just like believe better and all of a sudden you play better. It's that the belief comes first, and then it invites a process of us becoming a different person that allows us to play with a new set of skills and to develop it. So I guess to wrap that up, I would say that whether it's reasonable or not, you should believe that you're capable of more, even as an adult. And now I can't completely relate because I started at age 12. But compared to the prodigies that are playing Chopin etudes by age 7 already, I was very late. And actually I had a friend who was 11 and when we were growing up together, and he was a year younger. He played one of these, I think it was this one, at age 11. And I didn't even start until 12. So like he was very polished and everything already at that age. And I thought at that time, I'll never catch up. But at the same time, every time I would go to the next event or the next competition, I'm like, I will play those pieces eventually. I just don't know how. So nobody told me to do this. I just wanted it that bad that I thought I have to get there. And it only took me 7 years until I was already playing at a professional level. Age 19, 7 years after I started, was my Rite of Spring recording. And that was, without a doubt, established as a professional standard. You could argue that even a year or two before that, in my recordings, I had already achieved a professional standard, but that one is undebatable. And so within 7 years, I got there. I've seen adults make that kind of progress too. But it always comes with their mindset. So I worked with somebody for 2 years, maybe 2.5. And she played the Mozart, A major, the entire sonata. Now, we didn't get much into the second movement, but that first movement has some very hard variations with all sorts of technical things and rhythm traps. And then, of course, the last movement with the Rondo alla Turca, the rotation. These are hard motions to get at only 2 years experience, and she had it memorized, very close to tempo. This is not something you would typically see even from a kid who was talented. You might see that after 3 to 5 years. So I don't think it's an adult issue or a child issue or a talent or not. I think it's mindset and hard work combined with the right information on how to actually practice correctly. I do think some people's brains are just naturally wired more for music. So I have seen an element of that where they seem to progress faster than everyone else. But most people think that that's like most of it. I would say it's like 20% maybe of the people that get it. So I'm very musically wired. I'll acknowledge that. I also practiced 6 hours a day and read books and watched videos and had 8 teachers and went to music camps and got smoked in competitions by my colleagues. And I asked them every time, how do you do those runs? Or how do you do those octaves? It's not like it just came out naturally every time. So anytime I had a gap, I ran after it to fill it in. And I really believe any adult can do that. I've seen plenty of adults get very far in just a couple of years with me. One example too, and I'll end with this. I know I've been talking a lot. David worked with me and played the entirety of Beethoven Pathetique Sonata. And when he brought it to me, he was just starting, barely sight reading through it, and it was really messy. And he performed the entire sonata 3.5 months later, after basically not having any real piano training for the last 3 years. He had done some as a kid, had a break, came to me, we cleaned up his habits right away, and he did the whole sonata by memory. And then a year later, he did Opus 54, which is even harder sonata. With this impossibly hard last movement, all 16th notes for 4 minutes straight or something. And he totally held that up, and then we started even later the Opus 109. And I mean, these are not pieces that you'd even see like a talented teenager playing, typically. Maybe Pathétique Sonata, but he was getting into the heavy stuff. We looked at Ligeti etudes, and it's because he came to me, he knew I had value, and then he also believed that because I gave him the strategies that he would be able to achieve it. And I told him almost every week, you are capable of this. We just need to make a really good plan. And consistently he kept following the plan, and he progressed about 5 times faster than the average adult would that I have seen. So I think it's very possible. He only practiced about an hour a day, and I wouldn't say he was talented per se. He was musical, but it wasn't like his primary gifting. And so I believe if it's possible for him and many others I've seen, that anyone can learn this.
This is great, and I also see that for you there is no difference between a child or an adult when they come to you as a teacher. Because this is another thing I see a lot. Many adult students complain that teachers do not take them seriously. They don't give them homework, they don't want them, basically. So why do you think this happens? Is the teacher's problem? Because I guess if you have tools, you can use them with anyone.
Yeah, you can. I mean, tools work, right? If we think of literal tools, like a hammer, you could teach a 5-year-old to use a hammer or a 90-year-old to use a hammer. It's the same tool. So there's a lot to this, and I'm aware of many different situations here. So when I generalize, everyone watching, please understand, I'm not trying to say this is every teacher. But it is a lot that I've personally witnessed, that many teachers are simply not qualified for their job for one reason or the other. They don't have the right skill set for some reason, and yet they got into teaching, realized they were in over their head, and then they just made it their career anyways. So what sometimes happens is they like kids more because the kids that don't care are just a paycheck for them. So they could just teach a lesson and give them a cookie and say, see you next week, and they don't really care if they make progress. And then there's always an occasional, the sort of talented kid who's very self-motivated and does the extra study. That's like me, where I would go watch the videos and get other trainings, and most of my progress in the first 3 years was not because of my teachers. So of course my teachers liked teaching me because I came in and played these big pieces, and they didn't really have to show me anything. I would just ask a few questions here and there, and they go, oh, well, that's a triplet, and I would just figure it out on my own. And so there's enough of those kids that I think teachers go, okay, I don't really have to work, and then they just like those students. But then there's adults that come in who need to have things explained because they're at that point the brain is more developed and it's a little less intuitive in picking things up on your own. And then what it highlights is that the teachers ultimately don't know how to explain these tricks. So just recently, for example, I had a colleague who didn't know how to teach 4-on-3 or even just to do it. And this person then just used my video to teach their student how to do 4-on-3. And this happens all the time. I get comments like that almost every other day from a teacher, oh yeah, thanks, this was really helpful for my students. And I think this is because many teachers never had to solve that problem for themselves. And so when they have a student play a piece that they don't understand, how can you teach it? And I don't have to play the pieces my students play because my fundamentals are so strong, I know how to solve the problems. So it's not like you have to know every piece in the repertoire. Nobody does. But if you know how to solve all the problems in all the categories, then any piece will not surprise you. And so I think a lot of people are just limited in how much they actually know, especially in how they can communicate it to other people. And then there's a second side to this. That's probably a little bit less common, but it definitely happens. That teachers first were in music because they themselves wanted to be a performer. And for whatever reason, it didn't work out. They tried competitions, or they wanted to go to music school or whatever, and they didn't have the money or the talent or the time or various reasons. And so they're carrying disappointment in their own career, in their own ability to achieve what they wanted. And they ended up teaching simply because that was the way they could pay the bills. And so what happens is over time they get frustrated with that and they're burnt out, and they're looking for a way to sort of vicariously live through other people. And that then ends up becoming the younger kids, where they feel like, oh, there's a sense of hope because this kid's 12 and he's playing his first Chopin, so maybe he'll be in the Chopin competition in 10 years. And so they start putting all their energy and effort into those younger kids because they believe it helps them to feel like they can still achieve something. But in an adult that's 42 and is, working at a bank, they say, oh, well, they're never going to be anything but playing Chopin in their living room. And for that adult, that's enough. That's all they care about, But for the teacher who wants to sort of feel that energy again and has lost it, they don't know how to invest. And so for them, it's just like, oh, well, you're never going to amount to anything, so I'll just kind of hear you and I'll give you 3 comments and I'll see you next week. For me, it doesn't matter, and I'll fully admit, I've had a lot of frustration around my own career not really taking off, and like if I had my way, I would be practicing 6 or 7 hours a day and just performing, and that's it. But as I've taught more, I've actually, long story, I actually enjoy it more almost than performing now. But what I've learned is that it's really not about age, because I believe so much in the quality of music, regardless of the competition or the label or the age, that if I have an adult student who genuinely wants to get there, that excites me actually more than a kid who may be talented but doesn't care that much. And I worked with somebody, I won't say his name publicly, we'll just call him Jack. And he was playing the Liszt Totentanz. This horribly difficult with all this crazy stuff. He was like 14, and he could do it. I mean, he got through these notes like nobody's business, but he had about the worst attitude of anyone I've ever worked with. He didn't want to practice, he didn't care, he just wanted to show off and win competitions. And that's all it meant to him. And I was like, I actually got to the point where I had to fire him and let him go. I said, I gave him like 4 or 5 chances and then a final warning, and he still didn't show any interest in actually caring about the art. And so I said, all right, we're not the right fit. It's time for you to find somebody else, right? But often I don't get that attitude with adults. So for me, I usually like working with adults more, simply because those are the ones that are willing to work, because they're not trying to be the next, superstar pianist. They know they never will be, so the motivation is pure. The only thing they're trying to get out of it is a love and a depth of the music. That's why, with Key Learners, for example, I targeted adults, because I'm like, if I bring teens into this, they're just going to want a prize, or they're not going to care enough. But adults actually want to make good music. They don't want to stay stuck being frozen and being frustrated where they're at. And so I would say most of the time, those are actually the pianists that can use this information and these tools to a greater extent. Because when I teach a 12-year-old this stuff, they just want to go play a video game and practice for 20 minutes and that's it. A lot of the time, younger kids don't have the appreciation for quality practice or quality music making. So it's ironic. Not everyone sees it that way, but for me, I generally like teaching adults more than kids.
Yeah, I think the same way. And today I was talking about this too, because I think it's easier to find passion in adult students, especially if you are online because you can connect with people everywhere. Then you
Yes.
have this percentage of people who goes to concerts, listens to classical music, and has a dream of playing Bach or Chopin or whatever.
Yeah.
And many times for children, it's only because the parents want them to play or because they think it's fun, but there's no passion. So I agree with you on that. But there's a problem I see many times with adult students, especially at certain ages. Sometimes they say they want to learn, they want to change, they want to play certain pieces, but they cannot change habits and they are like a bit stubborn sometimes. How can they find a way to change so many habits, their way of studying, technique? Because sometimes I think some of them think this is too much. It requires too much of me.
Well, we're back to mindset from earlier. Because if people see, some people believe they can't improve. This is the opposite side. Maybe they know they can. But they also feel like they have to do it the way they've always done it. So let me say this. This is a hard truth. There's no sugarcoating this. If you are not willing to do something you've never done, you can't expect to have something that you've never had. You gotta just let that sink in. You cannot say, I want to get better and I'm going to practice the same way that I've been practicing for the last 10 years or 50 years. It won't happen. It didn't work for 50 years. Why do you think it will work now? You know, none of us can get something worth getting without a fight. And most of that fight is internal. I'll admit, there are days where I sit down. Actually, this morning, I'm working on Debussy Prelude, the Voix. And I sat down and I was like, okay, I need to get all of the fingering for the whole piece in one session, which I'm totally capable of doing. I could have done it. But I sat there I did what I tell people not to do. I sight read through the piece like 10 times and I was like, oh, this is fun. And I just made improvisations and I was like, ooh. I just did all sorts of garbage on it. And I was like, wow, I got nothing done in like the first 15 minutes. And then I slapped myself over the head, not literally. And for the second 15 minutes, because I practiced half an hour a day, I actually did get something done, and I got 2 pages completely figured out with the fingering. So actually, I could have done it in half an hour because it's 4 pages. But the point is, you can know what to do and still choose not to do it. And in that case, sometimes I still do that. Most of the time I don't, because my time is so limited. I don't have an option but to just get to work right away. So you have to really ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I learning piano? Do I want to actually get better, or do I just want to noodle? But just understand that reading through your piece won't get you better. And I knew that this morning. I knew that doing this isn't going to actually learn my piece any faster. I wasn't like trying to convince myself, maybe I could just play through it and it'll be better. I just didn't want to sit there and wait. But ironically, now it's going to take even longer to learn it in the long run because I wasted that time. So I think as long as you're honest with yourself about it, just know it's a big jump to like say, no, I'm practicing fine. And then say, no, I'm not practicing fine. I chose to do something that's inefficient. And that's already an upgrade from pretending it's not a problem. And then you have to then decide, okay, but what are my goals? What am I actually motivated by? Do I want to play this piece or not? Do I want to be able to share its beauty under control, under pressure, with a family member, for instance? Well, then I better start training a little bit harder on it. You know, again, it's what I said. You can't have something you've never had without doing something you've never done. So if you're not willing to completely rewire things from the ground up, if you know it's good advice coming from somebody who's a trusted expert that's proved themselves, you should probably listen to that. You know, and if you don't, just realize you are choosing the path of most resistance. You are choosing to get in your own way by making it harder when all these people who can play better than you and learn faster than you are telling you that's not how it's done. You can ultimately do whatever you want. And I've had students do that. But it's always going to take longer in the long run. So, I mean, it really just, we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to say, I am willing or I am not willing to have that result. And I'll share another story. I'm just making up my names so my previous students don't see this somehow and get mad. We'll call him Peter. He came in for 3 years of lessons. And I don't think he ever did anything I advised him to do at home. I think he literally just played through his piece about 100 times a week, maybe 15 to 20 times per day. That's it. I am absolutely convinced, because first of all, he would acknowledge that. Not every week, but he'd be like, yeah, all I did this week was just play through it a bunch. I'm like, that's it? Like any metronome practice? Nope. Do you slow it down? Nope. Small sections? Nope. It wasn't like these big mental like shifts. It was just like a basic thing, and he didn't do any of it. And big surprise, it was the same quality for like 2.5 months straight. And all he had learned was 16 measures of the first movement of his classical sonatina by Clementi, which wasn't even that hard. It's like, and I told him, you know, after 2.5 months, I'm always very patient, but I had a breaking point, and I said, you're at the level with this piece you could have been at week 2. And we're now on our 9th lesson on it. What are you going to do that actually makes this worth both of our time? And guess what? He quit lessons a month later. I didn't fire him. He just realized that, yeah, I'm not willing to work for this. And so I'm not above pushing students. I'm a lot more gut real raw with people one-on-one than I am on YouTube. Obviously, I'm not going to tell someone off on YouTube that I don't know. But I had earned the right to talk to him like that in person because I had encouraged him over and over to do the right thing and he didn't do it. And so in that case, it was like, okay, you don't want to practice correctly, you don't want to apply yourself, then you can't expect to play this piece. And that's the advice. It's not welcoming, but you can't get around it. You know, that would be like asking a software developer, you know, well, okay, we want you to build an app, but you don't have to learn tech, and you don't have to learn how all this works together. You can just type a few keys on your keyboard and hopefully you put an app together. It's like, no, you have to have the right knowledge and the skills and put in the time, push past frustration, or you're not going to build an app. Nothing in life is given to us for free. So there we go.
This was like a coaching live talk or something like that.
Yeah.
You can apply this to many areas of life.
Oh yeah. Yeah, none of us are exempt from this.
Yeah, it was great. I think my viewers are going to love it. And I don't have any more questions. If you have something you want to add.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me on. I'm always excited to talk about all of these things, and I can go all day. So I guess just some concluding thoughts here would be, sort of the common theme behind all this, I would say, is intentionality. Know what you want and do it on purpose. Which, like, the tagline for the Key Learners Piano Club is practice with purpose, because most of us just kind of sit there and like we don't have that much purpose. And whether you're at the very beginning or the very end of your journey with music, you always have to have a sense of what you're trying to achieve. So it's not just in the music though, it's how do you spend your time? Why are you playing that specific piece? Why is that goal important to you? The more clarity you can give yourself around all these things, the more likely you are to enjoy it and actually achieve what you want. So a lot of the time, when people say, I want to learn this piece, I go, okay, but why? And they have to give me a compelling reason before I'll let them do it. It's not just like, oh yeah, that fits your skill level. Because they might say that because they just heard it in a song or in a movie, and then a week later they're bored of it. And so I want to know, like, is there actually something that is going to pull you through this process? Because if this piece is going to push you and we're going to work on it for 3 months, it needs to be more than just pretty, because there's 1,000 pretty pieces out there. You know, so be intentional about everything that you do, both in and outside of the practice room, and I think you're just going to have a lot more fun with it. So there we go. Concluding thoughts. Thanks for having me on.
It was great, I loved it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Espero que os haya gustado mucho esta entrevista. A pesar de que conozco a Aaron hace más de un año, yo misma me sorprendí en esta entrevista debido a la claridad con la que explica y lo bien que habla. Si os gustaría saber más sobre él, os voy a dejar la web en la descripción y en un mensaje fijado. Y si os ha gustado este vídeo y os gusta mi contenido, os animo a suscribiros porque solo estoy empezando en YouTube y tengo mucho más que compartir. Para saber más sobre mí también podéis visitar la web que encontraréis en la descripción. Gracias por mirar este vídeo hasta el final y nos vemos en el siguiente.